Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto the creaky wooden floor of a Viking Longhouse, somewhere in the Scandinavian countryside. Let's say Norway, just for fun. Outside, the wind howls through the pine. Inside, there's a low orange glow from the fire pit. The air is thick with smoke and the unmistakable tang of fermented hair. You wake up nestled between your cousin's hairy legs and a sack of barley that somehow ended up in the bed again. Welcome to your Tuesday afternoon. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Always cool to see who's winding down around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to a wet cough, someone else's, of course, and the creak of old beams as the roof above you settles. The longhouse groans like a ship in harbor. Around you, 30 or so people are slowly, groggily coming to life, unbunching themselves from fur blankets and scratching in places you'd rather not look at this hour. It smells like smoke, sweat, damp wool, and the ghost of last night's fish stew. Someone farted in the night, and you're 78% sure it was the dog. The fire's burned low, but one of the older boys is already poking at it with a charred stick. You can't see much, just shadows and outlines, but the hearth's glow is enough to show you the mist of everyone's breath. It's cold, not grab a coat cold, more like your blanket is crunchy with frost cold. Outside, the world is gray and muffled by snow, but in here, it's chaos in slow motion. You swing your legs off the bedding, thin sheepskin atop wooden planks, and step directly onto a dried turf, probably goat, possibly cousin. The longhouse has no bathroom. Is the bathroom also the kitchen, bedroom, courtroom, pub, and makeshift surgical suite? One long, smoky, communal rectangle of woven walls and shared everything. You shuffle past bodies, careful not to step on a snoring uncle with a nose whistle that could summon. The fire is your first destination. You hover over it, hands outstretched, warming fingers that feel like someone else's. You glance up. Smoke curls lazily through a central opening, and no chimney, obviously, just a hole. One that sometimes works. Right now, it's working about as well as a screen door on a long ship. The woman beside you, your aunt, neighbor? You're not honestly sure, grunts and pushes a clay pot closer to the coal. Thin porridge today from the smell. Oats, maybe, or barley, possibly mixed with yesterday's leftovers. Or bark, or both. A pinch of salt if you're lucky. You watch as she adds something that might be dried fish. Or it might be regret. Someone near the back coughs again. Not the little cough of a waking child. A real, hacking, chesty one. You glance that way. It's the old man with the lazy eye and one functioning ear. He's been coughing like that since you. And honestly, everyone's just kind of waiting to see which god claims him. You offer a polite half smile and sidestep the damp circle around his bedding. You finally locate your tunic. Yesterday's, of course. It's wrinkled and smells like old smoke and armpit stew, but it's warm. Sort of. You wrestle it over your head, avoiding the wooden peg that nearly gouges your ear off in the process. Viking fashion is simple. Wool tunic, trousers if you own them, leg wraps if you're lucky. Underwear? Optional. You scratch your ribs. Definitely fleas. Again, someone passes you a wooden cup. It's lukewarm goat milk. You sip. It's chunky, not even pretending to be fresh, but it fills the belly, and right now that's enough. You nod your thanks and hand it off to the next groggy soul rising from. Communal life means sharing everything, including germs, lice, and your one wooden spoon. One of the toddlers screams, not from injury, just for attention. A mother scoops the child up without blinking, still half asleep, and shushes him with a piece of dried apple. You didn't even know there were apples this time of year. Maybe it's from the root cellar. Maybe it's just a really wrinkled turnip. Hard to say in this light. You notice someone has started brushing their hair. Using a carved bone comb, they scrape through thick blonde tangle, sending a small cloud of dust and unidentifiable particles in. You suddenly feel less hungry. Meanwhile, the fire flares brighter. Someone threw in another. Fresh light reveals hanging bundles of herbs, pots of who knows what, and the tanned hide of a deer still stretched, drying along the far wall. There's also your cousin Bjorn, who apparently slept upside down. Or fell. Unclear. A fringe detail catches your eye. High above the beams, near the thatch, small carved wooden figures are lashed ice. Tiny gods, little faces peeking down from. It said they watch over the household, keep out trolls, and other missions. Some are carefully painted. Others look like they were made by a blindfolded goat. Still, Nobody messes with. Grandma once swore the little Thor figurine made her soup boil fast. Historians still argue whether these carvings were religious idols or just extremely bored craft projects. Time to check the animals. Not because you want to, because they live just inside the house on the opposite end. A stone partition separates the humans from the livestock. Well, sort of separates. The line is more spiritual than hygienic. You trudge toward the animal stalls, where warmth and smell collide in a sticky cloud. Goats bleat. A sheep eyes you like it remembers the time you tripped over. The cow sneezes, and you almost lose your balance trying to dodge it. Someone left a pitchfork jammed in the wall. You hang your cloak there instead. Why not? Overhead, the rafters creak again. Wind? Spirits? Maybe just the longhouse breathing. You stretch your arms and try to ignore the pins and needles. The day has barely started, and already you feel like you've fought a battle. But hey, it's only Tuesday. You're already regretting waking up. The chill's deep in your bones. Your left foot still smells like goat, and that chunk of milk you swallowed earlier is doing something suspicious in your stomach. Still, no one's dying. Yet. So you shuffle forward with the slow resolve of someone who knows that the next few hours will involve chores, chafing wool, and at least one sibling-related injury. You pass the trough where a few others are slapping water onto their faces, using the same tin bowl, because personal hygiene in the Viking Age is a group activity. The water is cold. Not brisk. Not refreshing. Punishment. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache from the splash alone. You slap your cheeks with it, shivering, and pretend that made you feel more alive. It didn't. You dry your face on the corner of your tunic, which, fun twist, is still damp from yesterday's snowstorm incident. At this point, dry is more of an emotional state than a physical one. Across the longhouse, someone sneezes with authority. You glance over just in time to see an older woman casually wiping her nose on her sleeve before returning to the task of gutting a fish. You admire her efficiency. Sanitation? Debatable. You move toward your wooden chest. It doesn't have a lock, just a carved lid and a lot of hope. Inside is your entire wardrobe. Another tunic, slightly shorter, and a pair of woolen socks that double as mittens when times are tough. You opt to keep your current tunic on, despite its smell. It's already warmed up to body temperature, and peeling it off would be like exiting a cocoon midwinter. You pull on your wool trousers, which immediately remind you they were made by someone who hated knees. It's like wearing sandpaper that's slightly on fire. Everything itches. The seams, the waistband, the mystery fibers woven into the weave. Was that straw? Probably. Might also be animal hair. Or human. Hard to say. One thing's certain. Viking underwear is not the hill anyone would die for. You wrap cloth strips around your lower legs, called winningas, and start tying them with more hope than skill. These things are supposed to keep your legs warm and protected, but mostly they fall down at the worst possible moments and look like someone tried to bandage your fashion sense. As you secure them, a voice yells from the far end of the longhouse. It's your mother, or someone else's mother. She's holding up a sock and demanding to know who left it in the stew pot last night. You avoid eye contact and continue your winningas. Not your problem. Somewhere behind you, a dog is chewing something that may have once been a shoe, or a rabbit. You don't ask. Outside, you can hear the muffled sounds of people moving around. Chickens squawk. Hooves clop. The longhouse's big double doors are open for the first time today, letting in an icy gust that immediately causes 3 people to yell and 1 baby to start crying. It smells like pine needles, manure, and freedom out there. Time to make your way toward it. You duck under one of the supporting beams and nearly knock yourself out. Again, this house was clearly not designed with tall people in mind, or clumsy ones. The rafters are low and lined with storage, sacks of grain, dried herbs, fish hanging from string. Some of the strings snap under the weight of the cold, dropping their contents on unfortunate heads. You've learned to walk slightly hunched at all times. It's not a flattering posture, but it's better than getting knocked out by smoked trout. As you near the door, you spot your boots, caked with mud and slightly warm from being near the fire. You pull them on and immediately regret it. They're still wet, and one of them contains what you hope is just a leaf. You walk funny for the next few steps, but hey, that's life. Outside, the cold slaps you like you owe it money. You wince, pull your cloak tighter around you, and trudge into the yard. There's a thin crust of snow covering everything, glinting in the late morning sun. Smoke curls from the neighbor's longhouse across the field. A raven watches you from fence post, judging your every movement like some black-feathered deity of minor inconveniences. You nod at it. It doesn't nod back. The animals have begun their daily nonsense. The goats are already fighting over a frozen apple core. The pigs are squealing over what might be an old sock, and the chickens have taken it upon themselves to explore your mother's herb garden again. You grab a stick, not to hurt them, just to gesture menacingly, and shoo them away. Quirky detail of the day. There's a family down the hill who swears their goat can predict storms. They say it once bleated 3 times before a blizzard, and now everyone treats it like a furry oracle. You've seen it eat its own dung, but hey, far be it from you to question goat-based meteorology. You dump a bucket of slop into the pig trough, which immediately erupts into a frenzy of noise and splashing. One pig, Harold, looks at you with pure betrayal in his eyes. He was hoping for scraps of meat. All he got was sour barley and disappointment. Back near the longhouse, a few elders are gathered near the door, discussing someone's dream from last night. Apparently, someone saw Odin's eye floating in a bowl of mead. Or maybe it was just a particularly vivid hangover. Historians still argue whether dreams in Norse culture were considered divine messages or just side effects of fermented fish and sleep deprivation. You return inside with cheeks red from the cold and boots that squelch slightly. A new smell greets you, burnt porridge. Breakfast is served. You grab your wooden spoon, sit cross-legged near the hearth, and dig in. It's still hot, but that's about the only nice thing you can say about it. Around you, people are settling into the day. Conversations start. Someone is tuning a lyre in the corner. A child is already crying because they've been told to fetch water from the well, and they just did it yesterday. You glance around and feel that particular Viking sense of this is fine. You're itchy, your porridge is crunchy in places it shouldn't be, and your goat might be lying about the weather. But it's Tuesday, and the longhouse is alive, loud, and exactly how it should be. Except for that sock in the stew. That was not how it should be. You finally managed to scrape the last gummy glob of porridge from your bowl and toss the spoon back in a shared stack. Someone else will wash them later. Or not. The concept of a dishwashing rotation is more of a suggestion than a rule, and right now, the priority has shifted. The traders have arrived. You hear the thudding of boots before you see them. Muddy, well-traveled, and attached to men who smell like they've been sleeping inside a fish barrel, which they might have, depending on the ferry crossing. They've brought goods, stories, and that weird confidence only people carrying daggers and foreign spices can pull off. You head toward the longhouse entrance again, shielding your eyes against the midday sun. It's not bright, but compared to the dim indoor gloom, it's like stepping onto a stage. The sky is a damp blue-gray. Crows circle high above, and just beyond the fence, 2 strangers are arguing over a crate that may or may not contain dried eels. You know them, sort of. One is Herek, who shows up every few weeks claiming he's been to the east, though nobody's seen proof beyond a very stained map and a handful of shiny objects that might just be broken brooches. The other is a newer face, younger, squinter, with a chin too clean and an accent too smooth. He's probably from Hedeby, or faking it. You step closer. Their crate is now open, and a few curious villagers are circling. Inside, fish oil, what might be pickled onions, and one solitary silk ribbon. That last item gets everyone's attention. Silk is rare, precious, and seeing it out here, miles from any major trade port, feels like someone dropped a Ferrari into a barn full of turnips. Got it from the east, Herek says, grinning through teeth like broken fence posts. By way of Kiev. He always says Kiev. Makes him sound important. Nobody bothers pointing out that he pronounces it differently every time. You linger as the adults haggle. Items exchange hands. A carved antler comb for a pouch of dry berries. A hunk of iron for a needle thin enough to embroider with. You watch as someone attempts to trade a small chicken for what they insist is amber. It's probably just resin. But arguing over the authenticity of semi-precious stones is a Tuesday sport around here. The traders aren't just selling, they're talking. And that's what most people really came for. News, gossip, Juicy morsels of drama from places beyond your boggy little settlement. You lean in, pretending to be interested in a chipped bronze brooch while really eavesdropping on the conversation behind you. Said the Jarl of Skyringsel took a second wife. Young, barely of age. No, swear it. And she's already pregnant. He's nearly 60, 63, and blind in one eye. Someone mutters, still more desirable than Einar, and 3 people laugh too hard. You glance toward Einar. He's at the far end of the yard, trying to mount a horse that clearly hates him. The younger trader speaks up, drawing more ears. So, a fire in the distance on the coast, he says, adjusting his belt like it matters. Whole village gone, blackened to the ground. Raiders, someone asks. Maybe. Or accident. Or curse. The last word lands with a certain hush. Vikings don't toss around curse lightly. It's not superstition if you believe it's real. You look at the speaker more closely. There's something just a little off about him. His smile too slow, his eyes a touch too calm. Historians still argue whether Viking traders were also spies, scouts, or subtle missionaries of chaos. In this moment, you're inclined to think yes to all 3. One of the kids runs past, barefoot and shirtless, shrieking with laughter as he throws a stick at the trader's cart. His mother yells. The traders don't flinch. They've seen worse. You notice someone else standing near the longhouse, Grandpa, or at least a man you call Grandpa, because he's too old to remember whose child you are. He's squinting at the silk ribbon like it just insulted his cow. Looks like spider spit, he grumbles. You ask if he's ever touched silk before. He nods solemnly. Once. Felt like being kissed by a fish. You're still not sure if that's good or bad. Inside the longhouse, the gossip filters in ahead of the traders. A woman announces that a prince from the west has been cursed by a sea witch. Another says her cousin's cousin saw a ship with red sails, which could only mean doom, or a fashion experiment. Hard to tell. Meanwhile, one of the traders is now talking about a troll. No lie, he says, holding his hand up. Big as a tree, skin like moss, smelled like rot and mushrooms. Someone asks what he did. Offer it cheese. Everyone nods. This is the most reasonable response. You always offer trolls cheese. It's just good manners. And besides, if it accepts the cheese, it means it won't eat you. Or so people say. One of the older children whispers to a younger one, remember, if it's got one eye and eats moss, don't talk back. Sound advice. Quirky footnote. There's a minor tradition in this village where any story involving trolls must be followed by someone throwing salt over their shoulder, just in case. You do it, half smiling. Better safe than chewed. You head back toward the longhouse, pocketing a piece of dried pear a trader slipped you in exchange for sharpening a knife. It's chewy, sweet, and still slightly covered in lint. Worth it. You pass a few women whispering near the drying racks. They say the king up north now wears blue robes. Blue, dyed with woad. Must be royalty. Only the rich can afford to look like frostbite. Inside, someone's already taken your spot by the fire. Typical. You find a new one, wedge yourself between 2 cousins, and rest your arms on your knees. There's a quiet murmur of voices as the longhouse absorbs the news, trading it, twisting it, adding color. It doesn't really matter what's true. What matters is how it's told. A low hum begins, someone plucking the lyre, shaping melody around words. You close your eyes for a moment, listening as the music mixes with story and smoke and the distant clatter of chickens losing yet another battle with the wind. It's not glamorous, this life, but it's never dull. Not with traders, trolls, and tales to spin. And it's only lunchtime. The chaos starts with a scream. Not a troll is eating me scream, but a familiar, high-pitched, full-volume shriek that can only mean one thing. The kids are playing again. You lean your head back against the longhouse wall and groan. The adults have mostly tuned it out by now, but the younger ones? They treat the longhouse like a Viking jungle gym, with slightly more fire hazards and a dramatically higher chance of stepping on an axe. You peer toward the source of the noise. A small group of kids, barefoot and wild-eyed, are tearing around the hearth like a herd of tiny berserkers. They're playing Odin's Bones, a game that involves dried knuckle bones, shouting insults, and slapping each other with sheep bladders that have been inflated like balloons. The rules change constantly. So does the winner. And no one really cares who's keeping score, as long as someone ends up crying. One of the kids, your cousin, probably, though again, lineage in this place is more of a suggestion, is wearing what appears to be a makeshift helmet crafted from hollowed-out turnip. He's the war chief today, and he's just declared war on the chicken that keeps sneaking into the house. The chicken, unimpressed, pecks his foot and flutters up onto the rafters. Everyone screams again. Not because they're scared, because it's fun. You shuffle over to the edge of the play zone and sit on a stool, half watching, half trying not to get beamed in the face by a bladder. The stool wobbles. One leg is shorter than the others and has been patched with what looks like a chunk of someone's sandal. Classic Viking craftsmanship. A little girl stomps past you, dragging a doll made of straw and scraps of fur. The doll's face has been drawn with charcoal, and you're fairly sure it's supposed to be Loki. Or a goat. Or maybe both. She stares at you for a second, then says solemnly, "He ate the moon again," before walking off into the smoke. Okay then. There are no designated playrooms here, no padded mats or toy boxes. The Longhouse is everything to everyone, including the under 4-foot crowd. So the kids adapt. They climb benches, poke at the fire with sticks, to the horror of every adult nearby, and occasionally leap from loft beams with zero fear and very little success. You watch as two boys try to build a fortress out of firewood, then immediately destroy it in a pretend raid. One of them is bleeding from the nose. No one panics. In fact, someone hands him a rag and tells him to rub dirt on it and sit down. Viking parenting. Light on helicoptering, heavy on exposure therapy. A few of the older girls are off in the corner with scraps of yarn and wool, braiding them into necklaces and pretending to trade them for shiny pebbles. One of them is pretending to be a shield maiden. Another is pretending to be a sea witch. The sea witch is winning. You're pulled into the action when a boy you barely recognize runs up and declares you the enemy. Before you can protest, he whacks you in the shin with a stick that is technically a sword. You wince, dramatically collapse, and groan, "Odin, save me." Immediate laughter. You've just been recruited as the dying guard. Congratulations. As you lay there, slightly embarrassed, a toddler waddles up and places a wet piece of bread on your forehead. A healing ritual, apparently. You decide not to ask questions and accept your promotion from enemy soldier to wounded hero. Still lying down, you spot a little-known feature of the Longhouse. Under the nearest bench, a hidden stash of playthings. Carved wooden animals, some rocks with faces painted on them, and what appears to be a cat skull. Possibly real. Possibly not. Either way, it's become a treasured item in the kids' imaginary universe. They call it the Witch King. You don't ask why. A scholarly debate still brews among historians about how structured Viking childhood was. Some argue there were clear rites of passage, chores, apprenticeships, and warrior training. Others suggest that childhood was freer, wilder, a chaotic blur of mimicry and survival games played in the mud. Based on today's activities, you're voting for chaotic blur. Outside, you hear a loud thud and someone yelling. You rush to the door, thinking it's an accident. Nope, just two teens sword fighting with sticks again. One of them is wearing a pig skull as a helmet. You're not impressed. Points for creativity. Also possibly rabies. You glance up toward the storage loft where the truly feral children live. Those over 10, not yet adults, but old enough to sharpen sticks unsupervised. They're whispering up there, plotting something. It probably involves rotten fish heads and your bed. You make a mental note to check your pillow before you sleep tonight. Back inside, the smaller kids have moved on from Odin's bones to a quieter game, Dead King. It involves one child lying perfectly still while the others debate what to bury with them. So far, they've voted on a turnip, a spoon, and half a loaf of stale bread. One very serious child insists the king should be sent off with a carved spoon so he can eat in Valhalla. Another demands they burn a sock to make the sky smell nice. You nod approvingly. These kids get it. One of the more fringe theories about Viking kids is that they learn the sagas by turning them into games. Pretending to be gods, retelling the myths through play. It makes sense. Today alone, you've seen 3 Thors, 2 Lokis, and one extremely dedicated Odin who taped one eye shut and immediately walked into a wall. It's not all fun and games, though. Eventually, someone yells about chores. The older kids groan and scatter. A girl is told to fetch water from the well. Two boys are sent to collect firewood. One kid is dragged outside by the ear and told to apologize to the chicken. The chicken is still in the rafters, probably plotting its next move. You help clean up because you stepped on one of the bones and now have a splinter. Natural consequences. You gather the bladders, the bone dice, and what's left of the makeshift turnip helmet. One of the kids begs you to keep playing, but your knees say no. You ruffle his hair and tell him you'll join again after lunch. He nods, solemn and sticky. Back near the hearth, the adults are laughing at something. Probably the goat trying to eat someone's shoe. You sit down, stretch your legs, and shake the straw from your tunic. For a moment, the longhouse is calm again, the energy shifting from manic childstorm to the slow simmer of adults reclaiming their space. You glance around. One kid's asleep under a bench, clutching the Witch King. Another is quietly brushing a doll's hair with a chicken feather. You smile. They'll be fine. Probably. You lean closer to the low, rough-hewn table where the afternoon meal is taking shape, and suddenly the longhouse's rich tapestry of smells wraps around you like a heavy wool cloak. Salted fish hangs in the corner, its sharp tang mingling with the earthy scent of hard, dense bread, probably made from barley or rye, and the faint, wild aroma of herbs picked just that morning. You watch a woman carefully grind dried nettles into a coarse powder, adding it to a pot bubbling over the hearth fire. It's a Viking stew, simple but packed with flavors you wouldn't expect from the rugged north. Food here isn't just fuel, it's a statement of survival, culture, and even a bit of flair. Vikings are famous for their seafood. Of course, cod, herring, and salmon from the nearby fjords. But historians still argue whether the Vikings regularly ate whales or if those tales are exaggerations by their enemies. It's clear, though, that they made the most of every edible thing around. You spot a pile of hazelnuts cracked open by calloused fingers, a surprising snack that seems oddly delicate for a warrior culture. The Viking diet surprises you. You probably imagined non-stop meat feasts, but grains and vegetables, turnips, cabbage, onions play a huge role. The longhouse's smoke-darkened walls conceal the effort it takes to store and prepare food through harsh winters. You watch someone weaving strips of dried fish into braids, a clever preservation method. It's like Viking jerky, but with extra craftsmanship and probably a bit of luck to avoid mold. And speaking of odd tricks, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings apparently drank a fermented mixture made from rye bread called kvass, a mildly alcoholic beverage with a sour kick. It's not quite mead or ale, but served as a daily refresher. Imagine sipping that after a long day, probably wondering if you'd survive the next raid with your wits intact. The taste? Think sour soda, but with a Viking edge. You notice the children gathered near the cooking area, nibbling on dried berries, and occasionally stealing a piece of bread. Food rules here are strict but flexible. Sharing with kin is expected, but waste is a sin. The longhouse itself is a miniature ecosystem where every crumb counts. Meanwhile, outside the door, foraging remains vital. You remember reading that Viking communities often sent out groups to collect wild mushrooms, seaweed, and herbs. Some historians still argue whether certain plants were used medicinally or just flavoring, as the archaeological record is frustratingly vague on this point. Still, the longhouse kitchen breathes life into this ongoing dance with nature, making the most of what the
You watch
land
as a
and
woman
sea
moves
provide,
through the
no matter
longhouse
season.
with a quiet,
As you watch the food
practiced
simmer
efficiency
and the
that
longhouse
feels almost like
inhabitants
move
she
about their
balances a
chores.
basket of
The
freshly
sense of
spun
rhythm
wool on
in
one
this
hip
day-to-day
while tending to a
survival
small
sinks
fire
in.
where
It's
something
practical,
simmers gently.
unglamorous,
Here, women
but
hold
full
a
of
quiet
power.
ingenuity, orchestrating the daily life of the household with a mix of skill, strength, and sharp wit. It's easy to forget, amid the swords and saga tales, that the Viking world leaned heavily on their women, running the homestead, crafting clothes, and even making important decisions when the men were away on raids or trade missions. Historians still argue whether Viking women ever took part directly in battles, or if the idea of shield maidens is mostly myth mixed with later romanticism. But what's undeniable is that women were central to Viking society, managing farms, brewing ale, weaving intricate tapestries, and maintaining the all-important household economy. You spot a girl about your age working a spindle with nimble fingers, her concentration intense as she turns raw wool into thread that will become a cloak or a sock. The longhouse depends on women's labor like the hearth depends on its fire. You can almost feel the hum of domestic power in the air, the kind that doesn't require a sword to command respect. The work they do is physically demanding, too, bending over looms, pounding hides, and hauling water from the nearby stream. And yet, there's a kind of artistry here, too, evident in the embroidery decorating a cloak hanging on the wall, its swirling patterns telling stories or marking family heritage. A quirky fact sneaks in here. Some Viking women used a rudimentary form of sunscreen made from crocodile dung. Or at least, some historians think so. Okay, maybe not crocodile dung in Norway, but some kind of natural paste applied to skin to protect against the sun or insects. This shows a side of Vikings you don't hear about in popular culture. Their resourcefulness and personal care. You hear a few muted laughs from a corner where a group of women exchange gossip or plans for an upcoming feast. It's a momentary crack in the hard life of a longhouse, a reminder that these women had their own private worlds and camaraderie. Their roles, though sometimes overlooked in history, were vital to the household's survival and prosperity. While you observe, a small debate flickers in your mind. Historians still argue how much political influence Viking women really held outside the home. Could they own land independently? Did they wield influence in local assemblies? The evidence is patchy but suggestive. The longhouse feels alive with their presence, and that presence is anything but passive. You catch a whiff of herbs, maybe thyme or sage. Someone has been cooking something special, likely for both nourishment and healing. The longhouse is more than a building. It's a place where strength and subtlety combine, where women's work sustains life as much as any warrior's sword. Rich tapestry of sounds that you can almost feel vibrating through the wooden beams. The crackling fire at the center spits and pops, sending tiny sparks floating up through the smoke hole above. Nearby, soft murmurs of conversation rise and fall like waves, punctuated by bursts of laughter from the children darting between adults. You catch the occasional clatter of a wooden bowl being set down, the scrape of a chair being dragged, and the distant lowing of livestock just outside the thick walls. Sound here isn't just background noise. It shapes the very rhythm of life inside the longhouse. Historians still argue whether longhouses were ever designed with acoustics in mind, but it's clear the space naturally channels voices and music, making it easy to share stories or call across the room without shouting. The whole place feels alive, like a giant living organism breathing through sound. The children's laughter bubbles up again, light and unrestrained, contrasting with the more measured tones of elders recounting tales or issuing commands. You almost forget you're not just a visitor, but part of this sprawling household, a small cog in the day's unfolding story. Someone strums a lyre in the corner, the strings vibrating with a gentle hum that seems to soothe the busy hum of activity. Music is clearly woven into daily life, a balm for wearied minds. Here's a quirky tidbit. Vikings apparently used to sing or chant while working, a practice that might have made tough chores more bearable. Some scholars suggest these work songs even served as a kind of early teamwork tool, coordinating group efforts like rowing or harvesting. Imagine trying to outsing your neighbor while hauling a heavy log. That's teamwork with attitude. The murmur of voices reveals more than just conversation. It carries social cues, unspoken agreements, and sometimes subtle rivalries. You notice how certain tones command attention while others are brushed aside. It's a nuanced social dance where respect is earned by voice as much as by deed. Outside, the wind rustles against the longhouse walls, reminding you of the wild world beyond. But inside, these sounds form a cocoon of human connection, grounding everyone in shared experience. The longhouse doesn't just shelter bodies. It cradles voices and stories that keep the Viking spirit alive. Your eyes drift over the assortment of fabrics, leathers, and ornaments strewn across a rough wooden bench near the hearth. The Vikings' wardrobe might seem straightforward at first. Tunics, cloaks, trousers. But each piece tells a story of identity, status, and personal taste, carefully woven or stitched with attention you wouldn't expect. You reach out to touch a heavy wool cloak dyed a deep blue, its texture rough but warm, evidence of countless hours spent spinning, weaving, and dyeing. Clothing in a longhouse is both practical and symbolic. You spot intricately patterned brooches pinning cloaks in place, and the flicker of a silver arm ring on a man's wrist catches your eye. Jewelry isn't just decoration. It's a signal of wealth and allegiance, worn like a badge of honor. Historians still argue about how far Viking fashion trends spread. Was there a standard look, or did each region have its own style? Judging by the variety here, the answer leans toward the latter. You notice a young woman adjusting the hem of her dress, embroidered with delicate threadwork that hints at her family status. These details aren't just for show. They reinforce social roles and personal stories in a world without written ID cards. The longhouse feels like a runway of everyday expression, each outfit telling its own saga. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep in mind. Some Vikings reportedly used a plant-based dye called woad to create vivid blue hues, but others might have mistaken it for a magical pigment. Imagine the conversations. No, seriously, this cloak's blue because of crushed leaves, not a wizard. You catch a faint scent of leather mixed with the smoke of the hearth, evidence of ongoing repairs to boots and belts. No one here wastes a scrap. The longhouse's sense of style is rugged and rooted in necessity, but that doesn't mean the Vikings ignored aesthetics. Sharp-eyed visitors might have even noted subtle differences in embroidery styles that hinted at alliances or personal achievements. As you observe, you realize clothing is part armor, part statement, and part comfort. It shapes how you move through this tight-knit community and how others see you. No pressure, right? The practical meets the personal in every thread and bead, revealing layers of meaning as complex as any battle strategy. As you shift your gaze, the sounds of clucking and soft grunts remind you that the longhouse isn't just a human affair. It's home to a small, lively menagerie. Dogs weave between legs, tails wagging with eager anticipation, while pigs snuffle near the fire's edge, hoping for a stray morsel. Chickens peck at scattered grains, adding to the background chorus of everyday life. These animals aren't just pets or livestock. They're woven into the fabric of longhouse existence, part of the family and the economy alike. The relationship Vikings had with their animals was complex. Dogs weren't just companions. They served as hunters, guards, and sometimes even spiritual symbols. You notice one dog, its fur matted but eyes sharp, settling down near a sleeping child, protective and alert. Meanwhile, pigs and chickens provide steady sources of meat and eggs, essential for survival during the lean months. Historians still argue about how freely animals were allowed inside the longhouse. Some think it was mainly for protection from harsh weather, while others suggest the mess and smell might have been a small price to pay for convenience and warmth. The chaos of animals inside could be part of what made the longhouse feel truly alive, unpredictable as the sea Vikings depended on. A quirky fact: Vikings apparently believed dogs could help ward off evil spirits, so their presence inside the longhouse was sometimes more than practical. It was spiritual. This belief added an extra layer of respect for these furry guardians, who lived not just in the body but in the imagination. You watch a piglet scamper past, its tiny hooves slipping on the packed earth floor, followed by a clucking hen clumsily dodging a child's outstretched hand. The animals bring a comforting sense of normalcy and chaos that echoes human family life, full of noise, mess, and affection. Outside, the livestock shelters hint at a larger agricultural rhythm beyond the walls. Cattle, sheep, and horses kept for milk, wool, and transport. The longhouse is just one part of this intricate cycle, where animals are both workers and companions in the Viking quest to tame an often unforgiving land. Your eyes catch a small wooden shrine tucked into a shadowy corner of the longhouse, its surface worn smooth by countless hands placing offerings or seeking favor. Around it, Tiny carved figures and worn amulets hint at a world where gods and fate weave through everyday life like smoke through the rafters. Religion here isn't just ritual. It's the invisible thread stitching this family's fate to the vast and unpredictable cosmos. You notice fresh sprigs of juniper and small tokens placed reverently near the shrine. Gifts to Odin, Thor, or Freya, depending on the needs of the day. Maybe a safe journey, a good harvest, or protection from illness. Historians still argue whether Norse religious practice was mostly public or deeply personal, but it's clear that faith was woven into even the smallest moments in the Longhouse. A quirky side note: some Vikings carried tiny witch bottles filled with herbs, nails, or other odd items, meant to trap evil spirits or curses. They weren't exactly magical wands, but served as a kind of spiritual insurance. Imagine stumbling over one of those in the dark and wondering if you're about to be cursed or just pranked by a superstitious housemate. The shrine's flickering shadows seem to dance along the walls, reminding you how much uncertainty shaped Viking life. The future was a mystery wrapped in the whims of the gods, and rituals helped bring order and hope to the chaos. You hear the soft murmur of a prayer, not loud enough to interrupt the daily hustle, but persistent enough to mark its presence. Nearby, someone fingers a Thor's hammer pendant, both a religious symbol and a personal talisman believed to protect warriors and farmers alike. The Longhouse, with its smoke-filled air and close quarters, feels like a sacred space where the divine and the mundane mingle freely. You realize that for all their fierce reputation, Vikings were deeply spiritual people, wrestling daily with questions about fate, honor, and the afterlife. The gods watched, judged, and sometimes intervened, keeping everyone on their toes. You look up and around the Longhouse walls, noting the thick beams, the tightly packed turf roof, and the carefully fitted planks that hold it all together. This is no mere shelter. It's a testament to Viking ingenuity, designed to withstand the brutal Scandinavian weather with cold winds howling outside while warmth lingers within. The structure's bones creak softly as the afternoon sun filters through narrow slits, casting long shadows across the rough timber floor. Longhouses varied in size, but most shared similar architectural features: a single, elongated room with a central hearth and benches lining the sides. Some were divided by curtains or wooden partitions, offering a hint of privacy in an otherwise communal space. Historians still argue whether the smoke hole in the roof was a deliberate ventilation design or just a happy accident. Either way, it's crucial for keeping the air breathable in a house filled with fire and people. You run your hand over the sturdy oak beams, rough but strong, thinking about the generations of hands that carved and raised this home. It's a labor of love and necessity, made from local materials and honed by experience. The thatched roof, thick with layers of straw and turf, insulates against rain and snow, making the Longhouse remarkably cozy despite its humble appearance. A quirky detail: some Longhouses had carved wooden posts or animal skulls decorating their interiors or exteriors, possibly to ward off evil or simply to show off hunting prowess. It's a bit like ancient Viking wall art that doubles as superstition and status symbol. Outside, you can almost feel the wind pressing against the walls, a reminder of why this architectural style evolved. Inside, the Longhouse is a fortress of warmth and light, holding back the wild elements while hosting the messy, vibrant life within. You think about how this building isn't just wood and straw. It's a living space where daily dramas unfold, where families grow, argue, celebrate, and mourn. Every scratch on a beam and every darkened patch of wall tells a story, echoing centuries of Viking life. The afternoon light shifts as you notice the Longhouse's hearth taking center stage once again, the fire crackling with a steady warmth that radiates through the entire space. This isn't just a cooking fire. It's the heart of the home, literally and metaphorically. The flickering flames draw people close, offering comfort and a gathering point for stories, plans, and the occasional argument that's just loud enough to remind everyone they're alive. Fire in the Viking Longhouse is a tricky thing. Too little, and the biting cold sneaks in through cracks and corners. Too much, and the thatched roof could easily catch. Historians still argue how Vikings managed smoke control. Some think the smoke hole was enough, while others suspect ingenious but now lost ventilation methods. Either way, life inside this smoky cocoon shapes your senses in unique ways. The smell of burnt wood, the sight of dancing shadows, and the dry warmth on your skin. You notice a man carefully tending the fire, shifting logs with a pair of iron tongs, his face glowing red from the heat. He's clearly skilled, understanding the fire's moods, as if it were a living creature demanding respect. You might think the fire is just background noise, but here, it's the silent orchestrator of life's daily rhythm. Here's a quirky tidbit. Vikings apparently used fire not only for cooking and warmth, but also for ritual cleansing. Some evidence suggests they burned specific herbs or resins to purify the longhouse air or keep insects at bay. Imagine trying to relax with a smoky herb-infused sauna every afternoon. Probably a mood setter. The hearth also serves as a light source, especially during those long, dark winters. Its steady glow draws people in, encouraging storytelling that preserves history and legends through generations. The Longhouse's smoky atmosphere might not win any awards for cleanliness, but it creates a kind of intimacy, a shared space where the harshness of the outside world softens. You find yourself mesmerized by the flames, feeling the timeless pull of fire, dangerous yet life-giving, chaotic yet comforting. It's a paradox the Vikings lived with every day, an elemental force that shapes their home and their stories alike. As the afternoon lingers, your attention drifts to the mead and ale resting in large wooden barrels near the far end of the longhouse. Brewing and drinking aren't just social pastimes here. They're woven into the very fabric of Viking culture, fueling celebrations, negotiations, and even daily meals. The smell of malt and honey hangs faintly in the air, mingling with the smoke and herbs, promising a slow-burning warmth that's as much about camaraderie as intoxication. Ale was the everyday drink, low in alcohol, but high in calories, perfect for the hard work of farming, trading, or raiding. Mead, made from fermented honey, was reserved for special occasions, its sweetness and rarity marking it as a prized luxury. Historians still argue whether the Viking love of drinking was a reflection of their brutal lifestyle or a deeply embedded social tradition that kept communities connected. You notice a group gathered around a barrel, their voices low but animated as they pass around wooden cups carved with care. Drinking in a longhouse is a ritual, with rules about who drinks first and who toasts to whom. It's a dance of respect and hierarchy that keeps social bonds strong. There's even evidence Vikings sometimes used skaldic poetry during these gatherings, improvised verses that could praise, insult, or simply entertain. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed that the taste of mead came straight from the gods, and that drinking it could inspire poetic genius or even prophetic visions. So next time you sip a fancy cocktail, just imagine it might turn you into a Norse poet. No pressure. The communal drinking spot is also a space for storytelling. Tales of gods, heroes, and distant voyages weave through the smoky air, binding the longhouse inhabitants together with shared memory and myth. You can feel the ancient energy in these moments, where history becomes living legend, and every sip carries a connection to ancestors long gone. You glance out the window and see the fading light outside, a reminder that the day is moving toward evening, and soon the longhouse will shift into a different rhythm, one full of warmth, stories, and perhaps a little mischief fueled by ale. The late afternoon shadows stretch long across the packed earth floor as you notice the gradual shift in energy inside the longhouse. Work slows, voices soften, and the bustling chatter of the day gives way to a calm, almost meditative atmosphere. People settle into their places, wrapping themselves in woolen cloaks or leaning against wooden posts as the fading light paints the walls with a warm, golden glow. You realize that this is the time when stories truly come alive, when the longhouse transforms from a practical shelter into a sacred space of memory and myth. The children quiet down, eyes wide as an elder begins recounting a tale, weaving words with deliberate rhythm and flair. This oral tradition is the Vikings' lifeline to the past, a way to pass down values, warnings, and legends in a world without written books. Historians still argue how much of the sagas we know today come directly from these kinds of fireside gatherings, and how much has been embellished or altered over time. Regardless, the power of storytelling here is undeniable. It's a collective act of identity and resilience. A quirky insight: some Viking storytellers used subtle sound effects or even simple props like wooden sticks or horns to make tales more vivid, turning the longhouse into a kind of stage. You can almost hear the mock battle cries and feel the thrill of adventure as stories unfold. As the elder's voice rises and falls, you feel the longhouse shrink into a close-knit circle where time seems to fold over itself. The warmth of the fire and the shared voices create a cocoon, shielding everyone from the wildness outside. You catch the glint of a carved bone whistle hanging nearby, an ancient instrument possibly used to call attention or signal the start of a story. These small details remind you how intertwined life and art were in this world, each reinforcing the other in a delicate balance. As daylight fades, the longhouse seems to pulse with the heartbeat of generations, a living archive of Viking life and spirit, carried forward in every whispered legend. The longhouse begins to settle as twilight deepens, and you sense the rhythms of the day winding down. People move slower now, voices lower, and the energy softens to a gentle hum. Some prepare for the evening meal, while others find quiet corners to rest or tend to small tasks by firelight. The shared space becomes a sanctuary from the encroaching night, a warm refuge against the cold and dark that always lurks outside. You notice a mother soothing a restless child, her voice a tender murmur blending with the crackling fire and distant calls of night birds. The longhouse, with its smoky haze and comforting clutter, feels like a living memory, full of echoes from every day, every family, every life that has passed through these walls. This transition from active day to quiet night is as much a part of Viking life as the raids or feasts they're famous for. Historians still argue about how strict the daily routines were, but the rhythms you feel here, work, rest, storytelling, reflection, seem timeless and universal. It's the heartbeat beneath the legend. A quirky final detail: some Vikings believe that night was a time when the spirits of ancestors and gods were closest, making bedtime stories or whispered prayers especially important. You can imagine how that belief might turn the longhouse into a place buzzing with unseen energy when the last light fades. You take a slow breath, letting the scents of smoke, wood, and worn leather fill your lungs. The fire's glow flickers low, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink as if the longhouse itself is breathing. Outside, the wind murmurs softly, but inside, there's only warmth, safety, and the gentle pulse of shared history. As you prepare to leave this world behind, remember the voices, the laughter, the flames, and even the mess, because life inside a Viking longhouse is anything but simple. It's raw, alive, and utterly human. Wind down. Now, as the fire's glow dims to embers and the longhouse breathes quietly around you, feel yourself soften with the day's fading light. The warmth you felt here isn't just from the hearth. It's from the stories, the voices, and the sense of belonging that wraps around you like a well-worn cloak. Let your mind drift gently to the sound of crackling wood, the distant murmur of conversation, and the rhythmic pulse of a life lived closely with nature and each other. This world may be far from your own, yet the human heart remains the same, seeking comfort, connection, and meaning. As you ease toward rest, carry with you the quiet strength of those ancient walls, the whispered legends, and the feeling that no matter how wild the world outside may be, there's always a place where stories live and spirits find peace. So, breathe slowly, let your thoughts grow soft, and sink gently into the night, wrapped in the warmth of a Viking longhouse's fading light.